Hello everyone, welcome to the stream. Let's see if everything works as it should be working, hopefully. We'll see. But hello, this is my second year anniversary stream. This is 2 years since I started this channel and started talking about the Ukraine war, well, on a daily basis. So it is interesting to, I believe, talk about my experience through this time and how it has changed, how I see this conflict, and me as a person in regards to what has happened in this period of time. Now, there's been quite a while since I last went live. I believe, well, it was a very long time ago, many months ago. So yeah, you'll have to do this bit by bit and try to figure out exactly how we do this. I wanted to do a lot of things for this stream, but I ended up planning for it too late because I kind of just set it up and then kept delaying it, procrastinating before doing it. So I figured next time I'll prepare it much ahead of time. And until then, I'll just figure out. All right, it's saying it wants me to use a higher bit rate. So we'll try that. Maybe it'll improve the quality. I want to discuss in war Myanmar. Thank you. Okay, so first off, hello everyone. Nice to see you all live. This is where I talk to you and you talk to me, and we are face to face. Okay, so what I want to do with this stream will be unarchived as soon as it is over. It'll be up for, I believe, an hour or two, and then I'll take it off. It'll be unlisted for only members and Patreon supporters, as is with all my other streams. So what I wanted to do with this stream is pretty much to go over my experience over the past 2 years, what I've learned, what I've experienced, and all the different things. And then I'll go over my plans for the future, and then we'll do some Q&A. If you have any questions, I'll probably answer them. So first off, hello everyone who has joined the stream. We have One Thunder, Belikov Dimitri, Pi27, Heiko Forst, Henry's Telephone, The Eastern Roman, Run Anonymous. You're not really anonymous if you say who you are. And then Cyrillic, I believe, alphabet. I don't know how to read that. We have Bubs, Belikov Dimitri, Sean Bumstead, Sam Sisler, ZK Anan, again another anonymous guy telling who he is, Edva Christian Alvarez, Milos Jevcik, Guild Wars 2, another I can't read, I'm sorry, and a whole lot of other people. It truly is a tragedy. Ukraine was a tragedy for both countries. Yes, it truly is a tragedy for both countries. I believe both are getting hurt a lot from this. What's up? All right. Hello. Oh, we have Sean Sion Ogun Setan, who is my #1 fan. Thank you very much. All right. All right. So let's talk about my trip, my time, my experience with the Ukraine war. But we have to sort of, how do I do this? like this, potentially. There we go. Okay. My face up here, and then you see the screen down here. Okay, so that is the okay. So my time doing this, it all started a long time ago on the 29th of June 2022. The war had been raging on for 4 months, and at that point, all I really had going for me is that personally, I've always been interested in war, conflict, and history, politics, geopolitics, all of that sort of thing. So in this period of time, there was a long time where I just followed everything and read a lot of history. When I came across the Ukrainian conflict, it was in 2017 when I first read about it. And back then I was 16 years old. So at that time, I got interested in the conflict, started reading about it, started reading about Russian history at that time, as well as the Ukrainian history, just a little bit surface level stuff, because I had about the Russian Revolution and had to read about that stuff. And then I was interested in this conflict that was ongoing. Then throughout the years, I kind of had it on the sideline. It wasn't my main focus, but I just kept reading about it because it was interesting. Just a little bit, following the situation, the ceasefire, the subsequent negotiations around the topic, and generally the relation between Russia and the West, because I believe that at some point it would probably escalate to something else. Right now we see a direct conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and an indirect conflict between Russia and NATO. So I was very interested in how the situation would develop with time, considering the fact that, well, Russia and Ukraine was already in a direct conflict during the 2014 when the Russians annexed Crimea, and what followed was a indirect conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So they were already in an indirect conflict for many years before the Russian invasion, where it ended up being a direct conflict. Now, at the very start of the war, something really hit me, and that is how biased the media was and how people were just buying up the narrative. I wasn't really invested in Russia and Ukraine, but I kept following it due to the fact that I was interested in it. So I already had some prior knowledge ahead of it beginning. So I already knew something about the Russian-Ukraine war. So when I read the media narrative, I just thought, well, this isn't really what's happening. That is your projection of what's happening. And seeing that, I thought, well, I really want to know what is actually happening. So I went on and tried to go to what I believe was the best source of information when you couldn't really find the truth among the mainstream media. And that is social media, because social media, that is where you see people talk independently. So I started looking at different websites, different sources, what is actually happening. And slowly but surely, I moved from pro-Ukrainian sources like LiveUA Then I went to Deep State Map. I believed, well, this is very accurate. It is contact with Ukrainian military and so much more. Then Deep State Map introduced me to Telegram, where I then saw a lot more sources. And from Telegram, I just found pretty much everything that I'm using today. Then at the same time, I found that people went on YouTube and talked about the situation. The first person I saw talk about the Ukraine war was Defense Politics Asia. That is the first person I saw talking about the conflict. So what is very interesting to me is the fact that although I never really had a bias or prior understanding of who was right or wrong in the conflict, what I always knew was that there was something wrong with the media narrative about what was happening. Therefore, what I could really say is that I wanted to figure out the truth, or at least get as close to the truth as possible. And one way to do so was to reach the point where I pretty much wanted to find alternative sources to what the mainstream media was telling me. And Defense Politics Asia really helped me with that, because he pretty much gave me everything that was claimed by both sides. What do the Russians say that they have captured? What do they say they have done? What is the situation? And what do the Ukrainians say, and so on. Because of Defense Politics Asia, then found other sources like Denis Davidov, History Legends, and so on, where I just was introduced to this YouTube community of mappers talking about the Ukraine war on a daily basis. Now, watching all of these, I felt like there wasn't a lot of source criticism. From my understanding and perspective, at the very start of the war, Defense Politics Asia said what both sides claimed, and then the map was overlapping. So we know what both sides said, but what was the reality of the situation? What is the actual border? It could be either side, because both are claiming conflicting things. And then History Legends was always a bit delayed. It wasn't completely up to date. It was like a day after, a week after, somewhere in between that period of time. Those were the two I liked watching the most, and I felt that there were these issues. So I thought, okay, I want to find the latest up-to-date information and figure out what is the situation, what is more accurate, this claim or that claim. So when I went and did that on a daily basis, I ended up pouring multiple hours every day into just figuring out what the truth was. And then I figured at that point, well, I'm already so invested, maybe I should try doing what they're doing. So I went to pretty much make my own map. And then I added a few other things like supply lines and other parts that I thought was important for the situation, for the analysis. But following the changes that happened over the summer and fall of 2022, I went back on the supply lines and other things, as in the end, it didn't really matter that much when the front line was static. Sure, we know that the front line has been like this, and then there were supply lines going in through Kharkiv, through Dnipro, and so on, but there's not going to be any operations towards Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia, Kharkiv, Poltava, and so on. So what really is the use of seeing where the supply lines are? So I went into details. What about what actually matters? And that is when I found this map mode, which was all of these fortified parts shown throughout the map, and it really helped out with my analysis, knowing exactly where these fortified positions are. Although now it is outdated because there's constantly being built something new, it gives a general overview over how fortified the areas are, especially the 2014 and the Zaporizhzhia defensive lines. So slowly but surely I kept developing my maps, and I kept learning more and more as I kept doing it. At the start, I just based completely off of theoretical books about military strategy, what is the right thing to do, what sort of operations and strategies are being used by either side, reading the Gerasimov Grand Strategy and Zhukov. Why do I say Zhukov? What's his name? Zaluzhny's teaching, who taught him, what sort of, or generally how many Ukrainian generals really were part of the Soviet Union and had their education in the Soviet Union, which is very interesting to see. At the same time, how much NATO actually interfered in the doctrine of the Ukrainians during their counteroffensive and general operations. So all of these things, I slowly learned more and more about the tactics, the strategies, and the operational uses, and generally what the Russian and Ukrainian army were doing. Then also figuring out the balance of power. At the very start, it was very confusing and very vague. How many soldiers even entered Ukraine? According to estimates, it's between 150 and to 250 thousand Russian soldiers. We never really know, even to this day, how many soldiers were involved. How many from the DPR, how many from the LPR, how many were mobilized. All of these things. So in the end, we had so many different things and aspects and sources, and there's just so much you have to go through. And I figured, well, since I'm doing this anyways, then my objective needs to be 3 parts. The first part is to figure out the front line. What is the exact situation? What is the exact border between the Russian and Ukrainian positions? This forest line, who is under control of this forest line, this village, and so on. So going through and finding the most accurate depiction of the front line, that is the #1 priority. The second priority is the objective of both sides. What is the military objective and what is the political objective of the Russians and the Ukrainians in this conflict, to figure out what do we expect and like how far is this going to go on for, when is Russians going to end this war, when are the Ukrainians going to end this war, and all of these things. The final and third part about what I wanted to do is to simply make this all very simple for everyone who wants to go on my channel. I want someone to go on my channel, watch the latest video, and have an understanding of what the current situation across the front line is. Now, the third part has become very difficult because of, well, the simple case that I'm making these videos on a daily basis. When I make these videos on a daily basis, the ones who regularly watch my channel wants to figure out what happens between day 1 and day 2. If someone new comes to my channel, they want to get a summary of everything that has happened prior to this video, so that they know what is happening between day 1 and day 300 or 700 or 1057. So we have these 2 audience types. The #1, which is what happened between day 1 and day 2, and the other, what happened between day 1 and day 1000. Currently, my channel only appeals to the one who watches this on a daily basis. I'm currently appealing to the one who comes on my channel and watches every single day, and that is reflected on my analytics. When I go to my analytics, 95% of my viewers are ones who have already been to my channel. They've already been watching my videos. Now, I'm not very appealing to someone who just figured out that something isn't right about this war, so they went to find other sources, they get on my channel, they watch my latest video, and I'm talking about how the Russians advanced this simple bit across the Kalinia Chasiv Yar area and pushed towards the canal. That is not interesting at all to someone who hasn't been watching my videos on a daily basis. So there's a lot of things that I have to look about and think about and all of these things. And this brings me to one of the announcements of this video live stream. And that is, I want to write a book about the Ukraine war. The objective of that would be to write something that anyone can pick up and read. And once they read it, they get a better understanding, not just of the Ukraine war, but of the general political situation in Europe right now. There are 3 objectives to this. The first thing is, Europe right now, as I see it, is one entire being. The European Union is very united, not in the sense of every country and every leader agrees, but the fact that they move together. If they go one direction, they go that direction together. This means if there is an economic issue, the entire continent feels it. If there's a war, the entire continent feels it. People need to understand that Europe right now, as it is, and likely as it has been for a very, very long time, is united in the sense that if something is wrong, everyone needs to gather together and fix it. Otherwise, it's going to hurt everyone in Europe. That is the one objective of writing this book. The second one is the independence of Europe. Europe needs to be independent of other nations because in the end, every nation needs to do what is best for themselves. What is best for Denmark needs to be done by Denmark for Denmark. What is best for Germany needs to be done by Germany for Germany, and so on. If another country's interests is intertwined with this country's interest, then a country like Denmark may not do what is in the interest of Denmark to please that other part. That is the nature of diplomacy. You make you bargain, you make a deal, and you make sacrifices. However, I believe that should be limited to Europe, because what happens in Europe is affecting Europe as a whole, but what happens in elsewhere, like what happens in China, what happens in the United States, doesn't necessarily need to have an impact on Europe. I believe Europe should be independent of an impact from those other areas, because if Europe wants to prosper, then it needs to put Europe first. And the third one, which is the third objective of this book I want to write, is I want people to think critically. I want people to think for themselves. As soon as people stop critical thinking, that is when they get brainwashed and they make terrible decisions based on untrue information. If one cannot determine the truth from false, then we are doomed as a society. So those are the three objectives I have with this book. And I likely will also want to make a video project. Now, why I say this and why I have this as an announcement is because of one reason. I want to commit myself to making this, and therefore I'll also make a public deadline. I want this to be finished by the 29th of June 2025. I'll have a 1-year deadline, and I believe it is very important that I have this deadline and that it is soon, because it is critical right now in this turbulent time that people can think for themselves. I want everyone to be able to take the decision as to what is right and wrong by next year. So that is why I have that as a deadline, and that is my goal. Okay, so going through, that is my trip and that is my goals for the future. So that is pretty much everything I wanted to say on this video. Now, let's see about if you have any questions, if you have anything you want to know, then yes, that is pretty much going to the Q&A. EU loyal to EU, not EU citizens. Exactly. This is, yes, I want to make a peasant's revolt. I want people, the average person, to think for themselves, to be critical of our government, because I do not believe that our government is currently working with the interest of the people in mind, despite it being a democracy. Because people simply cannot think for themselves, so they vote for idiots who are pretty much very incompetent. Yes, I believe pretty much every single politician in all of Europe is completely and utterly corrupt and incompetent. And yes, I'm able to say this because I live in a democracy, blah, 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 blah. Pretty much every country you can say this and nothing will happen to you, and the ones that do, that is because they have a fragile ego. But believe me, European politicians have a massive ego. Is Veep an INTJ? I actually, I'll have to INTJ. I believe I am. No, not an architect, no. I am INFP. That is what I am. A mediator personality type of the personality thing. All right, so I will look a bit at the chat to see what people are saying. We got a Weeping in book before GTA 6. They think it's time for a shave. No, I will never shave my beard. There are so many comments about my beard and not that much about what I was saying, unfortunately. It seems my beard is very attention grabbing. Why doesn't Russia drop a kiloton warhead on Lviv to show Russia is not bluffing? I believe it is very important and to understand Putin as a person. Putin is very afraid of escalating. He has so far been on the backtrack of escalation. It is always NATO that escalates first in this conflict. Russia has the capability to shoot down Western drones doing reconnaissance for Ukraine in this conflict. Although they are flying within the international waters, it does not change that their activity is involved in this conflict. Sure, Russia can also fly over international water and drop bombs on Europe. That does not mean that just because they are over international water that they cannot be shut down for doing so. So Russia has in its right to shoot down US reconnaissance jets flying over the Black Sea, yet they're not. They're able to launch nukes, yet they're not. And they are able to do so much more, but they're not doing any of those things because they do not want to escalate. They know that no one has in their interest to launch a direct conflict between Russia and NATO, especially not Russia. Now, NATO, as I just said, I feel like is very arrogant. They have a massive ego. They believe that Russia is no threat at all, and that if direct conflict were to happen between NATO and Russia, Russia would lose very quickly. They still do not hurry into a war because they don't want nuclear war. However, I do believe that they want to provoke Russia into a war where they can send their own troops into Ukraine without starting a direct war with Russia. And Russia believes that that is the case as well. Therefore, they want to avoid escalation, to avoid that from happening, because if that happens, then they have promised to use tactical nuclear weapons. I have to use tactical nuclear weapons. Russia and NATO may end up in direct conflict. So there's a lot of this back and forth. What is actually happening? What is the goal? And all of these things. So in the end, what I can really say is they don't want to do it because they are unwilling to escalate. Can you make a collab with people who subscribe to mainstream media's reporting of world West good, Russia, China bad? I have a very difficult time talking with these type of people. For example, I was talking to someone and he pretty much said, well, Russians and Chinese are stupid, so what do we have to worry about? The Western people know how to think for themselves. They're critical thinkers. China and Russia are stupid. What are we going to worry about? And there's not really anything I can say in that regard. I can say, well, they are winning in pretty much every field. China is ahead of the United States and NATO in most technologies. The Russians and the Chinese are very well developed technologically, industrially, and all of these other parts. Western economy is almost entirely service-based, while Russia and China are natural resources and product-based. They have an advantage in pretty much everything. Yet somehow they are the stupid ones. And if someone is like that, then I really can't have a conversation with them, because the very basis of our understanding of how the world works and functions is not the same. I live in reality, they live in a fairy tale. So yeah, that is my opinion on that. Thank you very much for the congratulations on 172,000 subscribers. Again, it is not something that I imagined. It's not something that I expected. It wasn't something that I was aiming for when I started this. So I'm very happy and grateful that this has happened. Happy 2 years anniversary. I honestly didn't believe I could continue this for 2 years, and yet here I am, and I do not have any plans on stopping. What do you think the Ukrainian death toll is, Weep? I have no idea, and honestly, looking at historical data, we're never going to find out. An example is the Korean War. North Korea and China claims the South Koreans and the United States lost a lot more troops than they claim that they themselves have lost. And likewise, South Korea and the United States claim China and North Korea have lost a lot more than they themselves claim that they have lost. How much is reality? We'll never know. In 10 years or in 50 years, when we read about the Russian-Ukrainian war of 2022, we'll have statistics on Wikipedia saying, well, Russia lost 500,000 killed and 5 billion wounded, and Ukraine lost 2 trillion wounded and killed, and NATO actually lost 500,000 troops in Ukraine despite not deploying anything, and blah, blah, blah. And then what is the reality? We don't really know, because both are exaggerating the losses of the enemy and both are underestimating their own losses. And they are never going to say the truth, so we never know. Even from World War II, it has happened 80 years ago. We still do not know the accurate numbers. The estimates vary 20 million in each side. So what can we really say about the losses? There will never be any truth to it. I can claim today that Ukraine has lost 1 million men. Some people will believe me. A lot of people will believe me. I can also say that Russia has lost 1 million men, and a lot of people will believe me. Because there's nothing to prove that I'm wrong. When someone makes a claim, they're supposed to say that it is true. They're going to provide evidence, anything. But in the end, they just claim something, basing it on independent or anonymous sources. My anonymous source in Ukraine says Ukraine has 1 million casualties. My anonymous source in Russia says the Russians have 1 million casualties. There we go. I am super smart. Okay, who is getting away with that? The US government, Ukrainian government, Russian government, whatever governments, they all claim these different things. But in the end, they're all biased. They all have an interest in saying something. The closest we can get is the basis of the confirming dead people by graves, blah, blah, blah. But in the end, even that is unreliable because they do not really provide all of the evidence. And even if they provide all of the evidence, there's no evidence that they were killed in Ukraine, for example. Maybe they were in reserve and died of natural causes. Maybe this and that. So there's a lot of different variety as to what actually happens. But in the end, nothing really... There's never going to be the truth about the losses. Do you think there's a correlation between the war in Ukraine and the COVID-19 pandemic? The war in Ukraine happened in 2014, and COVID-19 happened in 2019-2020. So I don't really think that there's any specific correlation. They just happened in a somewhat close time. Crazy if Weep doesn't play Hoi 4. Anyone who likes maps has played it for at least 1,000 hours. How long do you think the war will go on? I believe the war will continue for at the very least another year, and that is because the Russians don't seem to want to launch any significant offensive operations until they have 1 million soldiers on the front line, and that will only happen in winter of 2025, like in 6 months' time. In which direction do you think this conflict will go? I believe that this will be a slow grind, attritional war until the Russians decide to finally go on the offensive, and then I don't think Ukraine can mount any significant counterattacks anymore because the Russians simply hit them too hard across the entirety of the front line, and the Ukrainians are currently losing more than they're gaining of soldiers, and without having a positive increase in amount of soldiers and equipment that you have available, then you cannot build up a reserve force to launch a counterattack, and therefore the Russians will likely continue building up their own forces for an offensive operations, and then eventually they will launch an offensive operation and advance through and gain an advantage and launch a successful offensive and eventually win this war militarily. Any update on Gaza? I wanted to make some more updates, but every time I do, it just feels very demotivating to do it because I have a very difficult time staying neutral in that conflict, so I do not believe that it is appropriate for me on my channel to make these videos, as the whole image of me is that I want to be accurate, and to be accurate I need to be independent, I need to be neutral. I keep hearing that the Russians have all of Rostolivka. Is that true? Until there is geolocated footage, then I do not believe that it is true. It is very likely that it has happened due to the fact that the Russians captured the majority of it, and by capturing the majority of it, there's still just this small part, and it likely has happened, but until it is confirmed, it is difficult to say. Who you think will win in the war? I believe that in the end, whoever has the stronger military will win. That is the general rule of war. Whoever wins militarily wins the war. There's also the political and economic aspects, but it seems that Europe and the United States are willing to sacrifice a lot of money for Ukraine, and Russia is able to stand on its own 2 feet. Therefore, it doesn't look like there will be a problem there. There is some political issues in Ukraine, mainly due to the term of Zelensky running out and his autocratic nature in ruling the country, which makes it difficult for him to stay in power for a very long time. So if this keeps delaying and if the war keeps going on and on, then it may endanger his position politically in Ukraine. All right. I think this will be a short stream for this one. If you want the latest updates, you can watch my latest video. And other than that, I'll just end this stream here. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for the 2 years together, and hope you all continue watching and enjoying all that I have done, and get to a level where you can think for yourself the reality and the truth of the situation and make decisions that benefits us, really, as humanity, as Europe, as whatever you want. Just benefit yourself, really. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon for additional